Greetings, you gorgeous lot, and welcome to this, the inaugural episode of Trivia Junction with me, your host, TJ Ramini. Now, shortly I'm going to ask you 10 general knowledge questions. There will be questions from all around the world, so no matter where you are from, what is your first language, how old you are, it doesn't matter. There will be some questions which you will find fascinating and hopefully know the answers to. Now, after those initial 10 questions, I'm also going to ask you some bonus questions, very specific questions about things that I have already spoken about throughout the course of round number one. So when you hear names, dates, places, things like that, do try to remember them. If you can, write them down, and if you can't, engage those grey cells and see what you can recall. Okay, with no further ado, here we go. Question number one, round number one, episode number one. So speaking of inaugurals, tomorrow actually here in the United States is Inauguration Day, and whether you like it or not, President Trump will be returning to the White House, the famous home of the presidents. Now, construction began for the White House on October 13th, 1792, and was completed November the 1st, 1800. But here is your question. What is the street address? Okay, so as it's January 2025, a new year, I thought it might be fun to do a couple of questions about some major things that happened last year. So I wonder if you know Claudia Scheinbaum, a scientist and a politician, last year in 2024 became the first female president of this country. Of which country, Claudia Scheinbaum, did she become the first female president? Right, as mentioned, this is a fully international quiz, so let's do a question about my home country of England. Now, here in America, there are actually over 650 towns and cities named after British ones. But in England specifically, there are 7 cities, not towns, 7 cities that begin with the letter L. I have to say, this one blew my mind. I couldn't think of more than 5. So I tell you what, if you get 4, I'm going to give you half a point. If you get 5 or more, I'll give you the full point. And if you get 6 or 7, my goodness, take my hat off to you. Okay, for those of you who are in colder climes right now, you're probably looking out of your window and seeing a smattering, if not a deluge, of snow. Now, you likely know that every single snowflake on Earth is entirely unique, and what makes it more extraordinary, for me anyway, is that each one is completely different to the other, and yet they all have the same number of points, which I thought was utterly remarkable. How many points does a snowflake have? Right, next question. This is a question about France by way of Austria, because it's about Marie Antoinette. So Marie Antoinette was born November 2nd, 1755 in Vienna. She was actually an Austrian princess. She was married at the age of 14. She was by the age of 37. And it is said that those vintage champagne glasses were actually modelled after a certain part of her anatomy, but I will allow you to work that one out. But here is your question. Which king of France did she marry? Okay, let's do a question that will take us out of this world, literally, because it's a question about Venus. Venus, by the way, is the only planet named after a female. It is also exactly the same size and weight of Earth. Can you believe that? It is. Maybe we should move there. Or we could if it wasn't boiling hot. Or is it freezing cold? Is Venus boiling hot or freezing cold? Right, let's lighten the mood, shall we, with a music question. Now, this unbelievably talented music artist has a slew of record-breaking accomplishments to her name. Amongst others, she is the only music artist to have a Billboard #1 hit in 4 different decades: 90s, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s. Who is that extraordinary music artist? Okay, let's do a movie question that's going to kind of turn into something else. So when we talk about the Oscars, the Academy Awards, people often talk about the Big 5. Now, the Big 5 at the Oscars are Best Film, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. Only 3 films have ever won the Big 5. It happened one night, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and most recently in 1991, Silence of the Lambs. Now, of course, in Silence of the Lambs, a very famous quote from Hannibal Lecter when he talks about eating somebody's liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. I'm sure we all remember the line. But in which Italian region is Chianti from? Okay, speaking of music, I was always a huge fan of Motown. The Motown record company was incorporated April 14th, 1960, and of course its genius founder had more than an eye for talent, writing some of the biggest hits himself. Lonely Teardrops, Reek Petite, ABC, I Want You Back, Do You Love Me? The list goes on and on. He's still alive. He's 95 years old, bless his heart. What is his name? To finish us off, it seemed perfectly apt to do a question about the internet, because of course that is how you're all watching or listening and enjoying, well, I hope you're enjoying this program. We can't even imagine what the world was like before the internet, and yet it's not really been around for that long. Created by Londoner like myself, Tim Berners-Lee, he presented the idea at CERN in Switzerland in 1989, and then on August 6th in this year, in the early 90s, the very first website went live. Like I said, it was in the early 90s, so I'm giving you a big clue there. In what year did the first website go live? The internet was born. Right, that is your 10 questions completed. Time for the answers before I ask you 5 additional bonus questions. Let's see how diligently you were listening. So question number 1 was, of course, the address of the White House, which is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, and of course, last year in 2024, Claudia Sheinbaum became the president of Mexico. So the 7 English cities beginning with L. And like I said, this completely stumped me. I wonder how many you got. Here they go. Lancaster, Leeds, Leicester, Lichfield, Lincoln, Liverpool, London. Tough one, man. How many did you get? 4 for half a point, 5 or more for the full point, and potential bragging rights on the line. And up next is the answer to the snowflake question. Every single one of them unique, and yet they all have the same number of points, and that number is 6. So the answer for the Marie Antoinette question is, of course, Louis XVI. Didn't last long because he also was Louis XVI. Okay, so the answer to the Venus question, like I said, it's exactly the same size and weight of Earth, which I found extraordinary. But is it boiling hot or is it freezing cold? It is boiling hot. It's 467 degrees Celsius, which is 876.2 Fahrenheit, or somewhere in there. So boiling hot is the answer. Right, the question about this phenomenally talented music artist, the only music artist to have #1 hits in 4 different decades, is Mariah Carey. So if you were to enjoy a nice Chianti in the Italian region where it hails from, you would be in Tuscany. And speaking of extraordinarily talented musicians, the founder of Motown Records is, of course, Mr. Berry Gordy. Berry Gordy Jr., actually. Right, here's this question about the internet. I wonder which one you guessed. Like I said, it was in the early 90s. It was 1991. Right, that concludes round #1. Your first 10 questions are complete. I hope you did yourselves proud. Now let's see how well you were listening, because here come your 5 bonus questions. Now, when we were talking about the White House, I mentioned the year, the date that construction began, and I also mentioned the date and the year when construction was completed. So for the point, when was construction completed on the White House? Okay, another I've already told you question. So when we were talking about the English cities that begin with L, I mentioned how many American towns and cities are named after British towns and cities. How many did I say? Right, and here's another I've already told you question. So when we were talking about Marie Antoinette, I mentioned how old she was when she got married and how old she was when she died. So how old was Marie Antoinette when she got married, and how old was she when she died? Okay, when we were doing the Motown question, the Berry Gordy question, I mentioned 5 hit songs that Mr. Gordy wrote himself. I tell you what, give me 3 for half a point, 4, and you get the full point. 5, you get the full point and bragging rights. So the last I've already told you question, I told you only moments ago, because it was in the answer to the Venus question. So when I was talking about how boiling hot Venus was, I mentioned the temperature of Venus both in Celsius and in Fahrenheit. I did say, I think that's right, but I did read out both numbers. So what is the temperature that I said of Venus? Crumbs. So the answer to the first I already told you question is the White House was completed, I already told you, November 1st, 1800. Okay, so the answer to the next I already told you question. When we were talking about the English cities beginning with L, I said there are over 650 American towns and cities named after British ones. So the answer was 650 or more than 650. Either one is acceptable. When we were talking about Marie Antoinette, I gave you a plethora of fun facts, including the age she was when she was married. She was 14, and how old she was when she died, and she was 37. Okay, the 5 songs that I mentioned that Berry Gordy Jr. wrote himself were Lonely Teardrops, Reet Petite, ABC, I Want You Back, and Do You Love Me? Right, and the answer to the Venus temperature question is 467 degrees Celsius, which is 876.2 degrees Fahrenheit, or thereabouts. But that's what I said, so either one of those gets you the point. All right, my lovelies, that concludes the first ever episode of Trivia Junction with me, TJ Ramini. Thank you ever so much for joining me. How did you get on? Let me know. Post me your scores in the comments. Let me know some questions and some topics that you'd like me to talk about, and I'd be more than happy to do it. As always, please like, subscribe, share, and all that sort of stuff, and I will see you very soon. Take care.